"You can't afford this ride," the dealer smirked, until the Hells Angel pulled out the keys. The chrome gleamed under the showroom lights like a promise carved in steel, and Bishop stood there with his scarred knuckles resting on the gas tank of the custom Harley Softail, remembering the last time he'd seen a bike this beautiful. 23 years ago, when his brother Colt had rolled out of the clubhouse on a machine just like it, engines singing like thunder, never knowing that sunset ride would be his last. The memory hit harder than any fist Bishop had ever taken, and he could still hear Colt's laugh over the rumble, still feel the weight of the folded flag they'd handed him at the funeral, still taste the ash of promises he'd made over a grave that shouldn't have needed digging. This bike wasn't just metal and oil. It was the road Colt never got to finish. Wait, before the next ride begins. If this story already hit you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up. Back to the road. The dealership smelled like new leather and old money, and the sales manager, a man named Derek Paulson, who wore a tie too tight and a smile too wide, approached with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He had perfectly styled hair and shoes that had never touched gravel, and when he spoke, his voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who'd sold 1,000 dreams to people who couldn't afford them. "Beautiful machine, isn't she?" Derek said, stopping a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him like a preacher addressing the faithful. "That's our flagship model, custom build, limited edition, only 5 made this year. She's got a 114 cubic inch V-twin, 6-speed cruise drive transmission, and more chrome than most bikes see in a lifetime." Bishop didn't respond. He just kept his hand on the tank, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm, watching his reflection warp and stretch across the polished surface. He was 51 years old, with a beard gone half to gray and tattoos that told stories he didn't speak about anymore. The patch on his leather vest, the death's head and wings, the rocker that read Nomad beneath the club name, had been earned in fire and blood and miles that stretched across 2 decades of loyalty to brothers living and dead. Derek's smile flickered, just slightly, when he noticed the patch. You ride with the club?" he asked, the warmth in his voice cooling by a degree or two. "I do," Bishop said, his voice low and rough as gravel under tires. "Right, well," Derek cleared his throat, glancing at the bike, then back at Bishop. "This particular model runs about $68,000. We can talk financing options if you're serious, but I'll be straight with you. The approval process for this tier of merchandise is pretty rigorous. Credit checks, employment verification, down payment requirements." Bishop finally turned to look at him. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and hard and ancient with things most men never saw. "I'm not here for a loan." Derek's smile tightened. "I appreciate that, but this isn't exactly something you walk out with on a handshake. This is a serious investment. We're talking about nearly 70 grand here." "I know what it costs," Bishop said. "Do you?" Derek's tone shifted, the professional veneer cracking just enough to show the judgment beneath. He glanced at Bishop's vest again, at the worn leather and faded denim, at the boots that had walked through oil and rain and dust from here to the Pacific. Because no offense, friend, but most guys who come in here dreaming about bikes like this, they're not exactly in a position to— "You saying I can't afford it?" Bishop asked. His voice hadn't changed pitch or volume, but something in the air shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks. Derek spread his hands in a gesture that tried to be conciliatory, but came off as condescending. "I'm saying this showroom sees a lot of dreamers, guys who want to live the lifestyle, ride the open road, all that. And I get it, I really do. But the reality is, machines like this aren't for everybody. They're for people who've worked hard, built something, achieved a certain level of success." He paused, let his eyes travel over Bishop's patch again. People who can actually afford this ride. The silence that followed was heavy as iron. Across the showroom, 2 other salesmen had paused their conversations to watch. A young couple browsing entry-level cruisers pretended not to listen while standing perfectly still. The whole space seemed to hold its breath. Bishop reached into his vest pocket, slow and deliberate, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Derek without a word. Derek unfolded it, glanced down, and his face went pale as primer. It was a cashier's check, $75,000. Made out to Canyon Motors Harley-Davidson. Signed and certified by First National Bank 3 hours ago. Jesus, Derek whispered, the word barely audible. Bishop took the check back, folded it carefully, and returned it to his pocket. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every mile he'd ridden, every brother he'd buried, every dawn he'd watched break over roads that went nowhere and everywhere at once. My brother died on a bike like this, Bishop said. 23 years ago. Drunk driver, dark road. No witnesses except the stars. He was riding to meet his daughter, my niece, for her 8th birthday. Never made it. The bike was totaled. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Bishop's hand returned to the gas tank, his fingers tracing the curve of metal, like a man touching a memory.
I made him a promise at his funeral. Told him I'd ride the road he never got to finish. Told him I'd find a bike just like his, and I'd take his daughter, she's 31 now, on the ride he never gave her, from here to the coast. 2,000 miles. Every sunrise he missed. Derek's throat worked silently. The showroom had gone quiet enough to hear the hum of fluorescent lights. I've been saving for this for 10 years, Bishop continued. Worked double shifts at the shop, lived in a one-room apartment above a garage, ate rice and beans, and rode a 20-year-old Sportster held together with duct tape and hope. Because promises to the dead aren't suggestions, they're debts. And this? He patted the bike gently. This is how I pay it. One of the salesmen across the room looked away, blinking hard. Derek set down the clipboard he'd been holding. His hands were shaking, just slightly. I apologize. I was out of line. Yeah, Bishop said. You were. Let me get the paperwork started. Derek's voice had lost all its polish, all its practiced warmth. Now it just sounded human. And I'll make sure we get this done right. Full service package, custom detailing, anything you need. I just need the bike, Bishop said, and a clear road. Derek nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. Your niece? Does she know about the ride? Bishop smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face from granite to something gentler, sadder, real. I'm picking her up tomorrow morning. She thinks we're going to breakfast. Doesn't know I've got a second helmet in my saddlebag and a route mapped from here to the ocean. Doesn't know her old man's ghost is riding with us every mile. Derek swallowed. That's a good thing you're doing. It's not good, Bishop said quietly. It's just necessary. The paperwork took an hour.
Bishop sat in Derek's office while forms were signed and numbers were verified, and the massive check was processed through systems designed to flag anything unusual. Through the window, Bishop could see the bike, still gleaming under the showroom lights, waiting like a promise about to be kept. Derek worked in silence, the earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by something that looked like shame mixed with respect. Finally, he slid the keys across the desk. Heavy, chrome-plated, attached to a leather fob stamped with the Harley-Davidson bar and shield. She's yours, Derek said. Title will be mailed within 10 business days, but you're insured and registered as of right now. You can ride her out today. Bishop took the keys. They were warm from Derek's hand, and they felt heavier than they should have, weighted with more than metal. Thank you, Bishop said, and meant it. Derek stood, extended his hand. Bishop shook it. The grip was firm, genuine. I hope the ride is everything you and your niece need it to be, Derek said. Bishop nodded, stood, and walked out of the office. The showroom seemed different now, lighter somehow, as if a pressure had been released. The other salesman nodded as he passed. The young couple smiled. And when Bishop swung his leg over the softail, settled his weight onto the leather seat, and turned the key, the engine caught with a roar that sounded like resurrection. He sat there for a moment, hands on the grips, feeling the vibration travel up through his arms and into his chest, into the place where grief and memory and promises lived like permanent passengers. Through the showroom window, he could see Derek watching, and the man raised one hand in a small salute. Bishop returned it, then rolled the throttle and rode out into the afternoon light. The parking lot stretched before him, asphalt still warm from the autumn sun, and beyond it, the highway opened like a ribbon of possibility. Bishop didn't head home, not yet. Instead, he pointed the bike north, toward the cemetery where Colt had been buried beneath an oak tree that was older than their grandfather's grandfather. The ride took 20 minutes. The engine sang the whole way, a deep rumble that turned heads and rattled windows, and Bishop felt Colt's presence like a hand on his shoulder, felt the years collapse into this single moment of chrome and motion and promises about to be kept. The cemetery gates were open. Bishop rode slow between the headstones, following a path he'd walked 100 times in boots and grief until he reached the oak tree. Colt's grave was simple, just a flat marker with his name, his dates, and the words brother, father, rider, carved beneath the Harley-Davidson logo. Bishop killed the engine. The silence that followed was enormous, filled with wind and rustling leaves and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. He dismounted, stood beside the bike, and looked down at his brother's name carved in granite. Found it, Bishop said to the stone, to the ground, to whatever part of Colt still lingered in the spaces between memory and wind. Took me long enough, but I found it. She's beautiful, brother, just like yours. Chrome and power and road, everything you loved. The wind picked up, moving through the oak leaves with a sound like whispered approval. Picking up Melody tomorrow, Bishop continued. She's grown now. Got her mama's eyes and your laugh. Still asks about you. Still wants to know what you were like when you rode. He crouched down, touched the headstone with one scarred hand. I'm gonna tell her. Gonna tell her every story I remember while we ride the miles you should have had. Gonna make sure she knows her daddy wasn't just a name on a stone. He was a man who loved the road and loved her more. A crow called from somewhere in the branches above. Bishop stood, walked back to the bike, and pulled something from his saddlebag. A photograph, old and creased, protected in a plastic sleeve. It showed two men on motorcycles, young and laughing, with their whole lives stretched out before them like an open highway. Bishop and Colt, 27 years ago, before the world got complicated. He propped the photo against the headstone, secured it with a small stone so the wind wouldn't take it. See you on the road, brother, Bishop said. Then he mounted the Softail, fired the engine, and rode back toward town as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. That night, Bishop sat in his apartment above the garage, a single room with a bed, a chair, a hot plate, and walls covered in maps marking every road he'd ridden in 2 decades of wandering. He'd lived here since the divorce, since the kids had grown and gone, since the world had shrunk down to just him and the club, and the endless stretches of asphalt that led nowhere, except forward. He pulled out his phone, old and cracked but still functional, and called Melody. She answered on the 3rd ring. Uncle Bishop? Hey, it's late. Everything okay? Her voice was warm, familiar, carrying echoes of Colt's cadence. Bishop smiled in the dark. Everything's fine, kid. Just wanted to confirm tomorrow. You still good for breakfast? Of course. 9 o'clock, right? That diner on Maple? 8, Bishop corrected, and dress for riding. There was a pause. Riding? Uncle B, I don't have a bike. I know, Bishop said, but I do. Just got her today, and we're taking a trip. Another pause, longer this time. When Melody spoke again, her voice was softer, uncertain. A trip? Like how long? 2 weeks? Maybe 3? Depends on how many sunrises we want to watch and how many stories I've got left to tell. Uncle Bishop, I can't just... I have work, I know, Bishop interrupted gently. And I know this is sudden. But I need you to trust me, Mel. This is important. It's about your dad. The line went quiet. Bishop could hear her breathing, could almost feel her processing, remembering. My dad? She said finally. Yeah. I made him a promise a long time ago, and tomorrow we're keeping it. Together. Melody's voice cracked. What kind of promise? The kind that needs a road and a daughter and a sunrise he never got to see. Pack light. Bring your mother's blessing if you can get it. And Mel? Yeah? Your old man would have been proud of who you became. He heard her breath hitch, heard the tears she was trying to hold back. I'll be ready at 8, she whispered. Good girl. Get some sleep. We've got miles to go. Bishop ended the call and sat in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the closer sound of his own heartbeat. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the longest ride he'd ever taken, not in distance, but in weight. Every mile would carry the ghost of his brother. Every sunrise would be a moment stolen back from death, and every word he spoke to Melody would be a piece of Colt returned to the world. He lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and closed his eyes. Sleep came slow, filled with dreams of highways and headlights, and the sound of 2 engines running in harmony toward a horizon that never quite arrived. Morning broke cold and clear, with frost on the windows, and the sky the color of polished steel. Bishop was up before dawn, had coffee brewing and his gear laid out by the time the sun cracked the eastern edge of the world. He showered, shaved, put on clean denim and his vest, and stood before the mirror looking at a man who'd lived longer than his brother, but still felt like he was chasing a shadow. The Softail was parked outside, covered in dew, and Bishop spent 20 minutes wiping her down, checking the oil, inspecting the tires. Everything had to be perfect. This ride wasn't just transportation.
It was pilgrimage. At 7:30, he fired the engine and let it warm while he secured the saddlebags, packed with clothes, tools, the route maps he'd been marking for a decade. In the right bag, wrapped in a soft cloth, was Colt's old riding jacket, the one they'd pulled from the wreckage and cleaned and folded and given to Bishop at the funeral. He'd never worn it, never let anyone else touch it. But now it was coming along, because Colt deserved to feel the wind one more time. By 7:50, Bishop was rolling through town, the morning air sharp in his lungs and the bike humming beneath him like a living thing. He reached Melody's apartment at 8 exactly, parked at the curb, and killed the engine. She was waiting on the steps. Bishop's breath caught. She looked so much like Colt it hurt. Same dark hair, same sharp cheekbones, same way of standing with her weight on one hip like she was ready to either run or fight. She wore jeans and a leather jacket Bishop had bought her 3 Christmases ago, and in her hands she held a small backpack and a look of nervous anticipation. "Morning, kid," Bishop said as he dismounted. "Morning." Melody walked down the steps slowly, eyes on the bike. "She's beautiful." "She is." Melody circled the Softail, taking in every detail, the chrome, the custom paint, the leather saddlebags embossed with the club logo. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "This is like Dad's bike," she said. "Isn't it?" "It is." "You bought this for him." "I bought this for you," Bishop corrected gently. "For the ride he wanted to give you. For the miles he ran out of time to show you." Melody's hand went to her mouth. She turned away, shoulders shaking. Bishop waited. Grief couldn't be rushed. When she turned back, her face was streaked with tears, but her jaw was set. "Where are we going?" "West," Bishop said. "All the way to the Pacific. Every back road and forgotten highway. Every sunrise your dad would have stopped to watch."
Every story I can remember about who he was before the world took him. Melody nodded, wiped her eyes, and slung the backpack over her shoulder. "Okay. Okay? Yeah." She smiled, trembling but real. "Let's ride." Bishop pulled the second helmet from the saddlebag, black, with a visor that caught the morning light. He handed it to her, and when their fingers touched, he felt the current of connection, of blood and memory and promises too big for words. Melody put on the helmet. Bishop mounted the bike and waited while she climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist,
her weight settling against his back. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but let's go anyway." Bishop smiled, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He rolled the throttle once, twice, feeling the power beneath them, feeling Colt's presence like a third rider in the space between heartbeats. Then he released the clutch, and they pulled away from the curb, heading west toward the highway, toward the sunrise, toward 2,000 miles of memory and road. The city fell away behind them in a blur of buildings and traffic lights, and then they were on the open highway, the world spreading out in every direction, the wind cold and clean and carrying the scent of pine and distance. Bishop rode steady, not fast, letting the miles roll by at a pace that allowed for watching and feeling and being present in each moment. Melody's grip around his waist loosened as she grew comfortable with the rhythm, and after an hour she leaned close and shouted over the engine, "Where's the first stop?" Bishop pointed ahead, to where the highway curved through a stretch of forest that looked like it had been there since before roads existed. "There's a lookout about 20 miles up. Your dad used to stop there every time he rode this way. Said it was the only place he could hear himself think." They reached the lookout as the sun climbed higher, painting the trees in shades of gold and amber. Bishop pulled off the highway onto a gravel turnout that overlooked a valley stretching for miles, all forest and river and sky. He killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, enormous and holy. Melody dismounted, pulled off her helmet, and stood at the edge of the overlook with her hair blowing in the wind. Bishop joined her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "He really came here?" Melody asked. "Every time. Used to say the road was where he worked things out. The lookout was where he let them go." Melody was quiet for a long moment. Then, what did he need to let go of? Bishop considered. How much truth could a daughter handle about a father she barely remembered? How much weight should she carry? "Same things we all carry," Bishop said finally. "Mistakes, regrets, the distance between who we are and who we want to be." He paused. "He loved you, Mel. More than he loved the road. More than anything. You need to know that." "I do," she said softly. "I just wish I remembered more. That's why we're here. I'm going to give you back what time took. 1 mile at a time." They stood there together as the sun rose higher, and Bishop told her the first story, about the day Colt had taught him to ride, how they'd gone to an empty parking lot at dawn, and Colt had put him on an old Sportster and said, "Don't think, just feel. The bike knows what to do. You just have to trust it." Melody laughed at the image of Bishop as a scared teenager, and the sound was so much like Colt's laugh that Bishop had to turn away for a moment, had to breathe through the ache. They rode for 6 days straight, stopping in every place Colt had loved. The diner in a town so small it didn't have a traffic light, where Colt used to order black coffee and cherry pie and talk to the waitress about her kids. The stretch of highway that ran along a river, where the light turned the water to liquid gold at sunset. The roadside memorial where another rider had gone down, where Colt always stopped to pay respects because brotherhood didn't end with a last name. Each night they found motels with names like Sunset Rest and Traveler's Inn, places where the beds were lumpy and the walls were thin and the neon signs buzzed with promises of vacancy and HBO. Bishop would book 2 rooms, and they'd meet in the parking lot at dawn, ready to chase another day. And every night, after Melody had gone to her room, Bishop would sit on the bike in the parking lot and talk to Colt, telling him about the day, about how Melody's eyes lit up when she heard a story about her father, about how she'd started laughing more and crying less, about how the road was doing exactly what Bishop had hoped it would do, giving her back a father 1 mile at a time. On the 7th day, they reached a small town in the mountains where Colt had once lived for 3 months, working at a garage and sending every paycheck home to Melody's mother. Bishop hadn't planned to stop here, hadn't mentioned it in the route, but when he saw the sign, he pulled over without thinking. "What is it?" Melody asked. Bishop sat on the bike, engine idling, staring at the town's main street, a strip of old buildings and faded paint, a place that time had passed by and forgotten. "Your dad worked here," Bishop said, "long time ago, before you were born." Melody's arms tightened around him. "Can we see it?" The garage? Bishop hesitated, then nodded.
He rode slowly into town, following memory more than maps, until he found the garage, a squat building with rusted bay doors and a hand-painted sign that read Sal's Auto Repair. They parked across the street. The garage looked closed, abandoned even, with weeds growing through cracks in the pavement and windows so dirty they were almost opaque. But when Bishop and Melody crossed the street and approached the door, they heard the sound of tools clanging inside, the hiss of an air compressor, the low murmur of a radio playing classic rock. Bishop knocked. The sound stopped. Footsteps approached. The doors swung open to reveal a man in his 70s, bald except for a white fringe above his ears, wearing coveralls stained with decades of oil and grease. His eyes were sharp, bright, alive. "Help you?" he asked. "Maybe," Bishop said. "I'm looking for a man named Sal. Used to run this place." The old man's face split into a grin. "You're looking at him, though most days I feel more like a ghost haunting his own memories." He squinted at Bishop, at the patch on his vest. "You ride with a club?" "I do. And my brother used to work for you, long time ago. Man named Colt Mercer." Sal's grin faded. His eyes went distant, searching. Then recognition dawned, and his whole face transformed. Colt, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph Colt Mercer. He laughed, a sound full of wonder and disbelief. That man could make an engine sing. Best mechanic I ever hired. Worked here for, 3 months? 4? 3, Bishop said. Summer of 2001. Right. Came through on a bike that should have been in a museum. Stayed long enough to earn some road money, then disappeared one morning with a wave and a promise to send a postcard. Sal's eyes focused on Bishop. "You said brother?" "Yeah, he was my brother." Sal's smile faltered. "Was?" "Died 23 years ago. Motorcycle accident." The old man's face fell. "Ah, hell. I'm sorry. That's a damn shame." He was a good man, good soul. Talked about his little girl all the time. Had a picture of her in his wallet, used to show it to anyone who'd look. Melody made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Sal's eyes shifted to her, and understanding crossed his face like a slow sunrise. "This is his daughter," Bishop said quietly. "Melody. We're riding the roads he used to ride, trying to give her back some of what she lost." Sal stepped stomachward, took Melody's hand in both of his grip warm and rough and real. "Your father was one of the finest men I ever met, young lady. Worked harder than anyone, never complained, never asked for more than he earned. And he loved you. Talked about you every single day. About how he was going to save up enough to buy you a pony or maybe a go-kart or whatever little girls wanted. He just wanted to give you the world." Melody's tears came freely now, and she didn't try to hype him. Sal held her hand a moment longer, then released it and turned to Bishop. "You come inside, both of you. I've got something." They followed him into the garage, into a space that smelled like oil and metal and history. Tools hung on pegboards, organized with the precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime in this exact space. In the corner sat a desk, ancient and scarred, covered in invoices and parts catalogs. Sal rummaged through a drawer, muttering to himself, until he pulled out a photograph, yellowed at the edges and creased down the middle. He handed it to Melody. The photo showed a younger Sal standing beside a man in grease-stained coveralls, both grinning at the camera, both holding wrenches like weapons or trophies. The man beside Sal was Colt, younger, leaner, with all his years still ahead of him. "Took that on his last day here," Sal said. "We'd just finished rebuilding a 67 shovelhead. Took us 3 weeks. When she fired up, the sound was so pure it made me want to cry." He smiled at the memory.
"Your daddy said it was the best bike he'd ever touched. Then he climbed on his own ride and left. Last thing he told me was, 'Sal, if I ever settle down, I'm buying a place just like this, somewhere I can fix bikes and watch my kid grow up.' I told him he'd better send me a postcard when he did." Melody looked up, eyes red. "Did he? Send a postcard?" Sal shook his head slowly. No, but I never stopped hoping. Bishop put a hand on Melody's shoulder. He would have, if he'd had the time. They spent an hour with Sal, listening to stories about Colt's brief time in the mountain town, about the engines he'd fixed and the customers he'd charmed, and the way he'd always talked about home like it was a destination worth every mile. When they finally left, Sal hugged them both, and the old man's eyes were wet. You keep riding, Sal told them at the door. Keep chasing those roads. Your brother's out there somewhere, watching. I believe that. Bishop shook his hand. Thank you. No, Sal said. Thank you for letting me remember him one more time. They rode out of town in silence, the photograph safely tucked in Melody's jacket pocket, and Bishop felt something shift inside him. A lightness, a sense that the weight he'd been carrying for 23 years was starting to distribute across more shoulders, more hearts, more miles. 3 days later, they reached the coast. The Pacific opened before them like a promise kept, stretching from horizon to horizon, gray and green and endless. Bishop pulled the bike to a stop at a lookout where the highway met the cliffs, where the waves crashed hundreds of feet below, and the wind tasted like salt and distance. He killed the engine. Melody dismounted first, walking to the edge of the overlook with her hands shoved in her pockets, staring out at the water like it held answers to questions she hadn't yet learned to ask. Bishop joined her, and they stood together in the wind. This is it, Melody said softly. The end.
No, Bishop said. The beginning. This is where your dad's road ended too soon, but it's where ours keeps going. Melody turned to look at him. What do you mean? Bishop pulled Colt's old riding jacket from the saddlebag, held it up so the wind caught it, filled it with air and motion like it was being worn by a ghost. Your dad wanted to bring you here, wanted to show you the ocean, wanted to stand right here and tell you that no matter how big the world got, no matter how lost you felt, there was always another horizon to chase. He handed her the jacket. He can't do that, but I can. And I'm telling you now, Mel, the road doesn't end. It just changes. And you get to choose where it goes next. Melody took the jacket, held it against her chest like a shield. I don't know how. Nobody does, but that's the beauty of it. You just point yourself at something that feels true, and you keep moving. Same way your dad did. Same way I'm doing now. They stayed at the coast for 2 days, sleeping in a motel that overlooked the water, eating breakfast at a diner where the waitress called everyone Hun, and the coffee tasted like it had been brewed in the same pot since 1987. They walked the beach at dawn and sunset, collected shells and stories, and on the second night, Melody asked Bishop to tell her everything he remembered about Colt. Not just the legend, not just the good parts, but the real man, flawed and human and trying. So Bishop did. He told her about Colt's temper, quick and hot and gone just as fast. About the time he'd punched a man in a bar for disrespecting a woman and ended up in jail for 3 days. About the nights he'd drunk too much and cried about feeling like a bad father, like he wasn't enough. About the mornings after, when he'd wake up determined to be better, to do better, to earn the love he'd been given. He wasn't perfect, Bishop said, but he was real, and he tried. Every single day, he tried.
Melody cried, and Bishop let her, because grief needed space, and tears were just love with nowhere else to go. On the 3rd day, they began the ride home. The return trip was slower, quieter, filled with long stretches of silence where words weren't necessary because the road and the engine and the rhythm said everything that needed saying. They stopped at different places this time. Roadside diners Melody wanted to try, overlooks she wanted to photograph, stretches of highway where she asked Bishop to stop so she could just stand and feel the wind and listen to the world breathe. One afternoon, a week into the journey home, they pulled into a rest stop to refuel. While Bishop pumped gas, Melody wandered over to a bulletin board covered in flyers and notices. Lost pets, handyman services, community events. She stood there for a long time, reading something Bishop couldn't see. When she came back, her face was thoughtful. "What is it?" Bishop asked. "There's a job posting.
Mechanic needed. Small shop, 2 towns over. Room for growth. She paused. I've been thinking about making a change. About finding something that feels, I don't know, more real. Bishop tightened the gas cap, hung up the nozzle. You thinking about applying? Maybe. Melody looked at him. Would that be crazy? Changing everything because of a 2-week ride? No, Bishop said. That'd be brave. That'd be you choosing your own road. She smiled, small but genuine. Dad would have liked that, wouldn't he? He would have been proud. They rode the last 500 miles in 2 days, arriving back in town just as the sun set on a cool autumn evening. Bishop pulled up to Melody's apartment and killed the engine, and the silence that followed felt different than the silence they'd started with. Deeper, warmer, filled with understanding. Melody dismounted, pulled off her helmet, and stood there looking at the bike, at Bishop, at the world that had somehow become both bigger and more manageable in the span of 14 days. Thank you, she said, for this, for all of it, for keeping your promise. Bishop nodded. Thank you for letting me. Will we do it again? Someday? Whenever you're ready. The road's not going anywhere. Melody leaned down, kissed his cheek, then grabbed her backpack and headed up the steps to her apartment. At the door, she turned back. Uncle Bishop. Yeah? I think he's proud of you too, for keeping the promise, for being the kind of man who doesn't forget. Bishop's throat tightened. He managed to nod. Melody went inside, and Bishop sat on the bike for a long moment, feeling the weight of completion, the strange emptiness that came after a promise kept. Then he fired the engine and rode through town, through familiar streets that felt different somehow, until he reached the cemetery. It was almost dark. The oak tree was a silhouette against the deepening sky, and Colt's grave was just a shadow among shadows. Bishop parked the bike, walked to the headstone, and stood there in the fading light. We did it, brother, Bishop said to the stone, to the ground, to the memory that lived in the space between heartbeats. 2,000 miles. Every sunrise you missed. Every story I could remember. She knows you now, really knows you. Not just a legend, but the man. He paused, let the wind carry his words away. She's gonna be okay. Better than okay. She's gonna find her own road, same way you taught me to find mine. The oak leaves rustled. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, long and lonely, and heading somewhere else. Bishop crouched down, touched the headstone one last time. I'll keep riding, Colt. Keep watching the sunrises. Keep carrying the stories. Because that's what brothers do. That's what family means. He stood, walked back to the bike, and rode home through the darkness. The engine's rumble, the only sound in a world gone quiet and holy, with the weight of promises kept and roads that stretched forever into whatever came next. 3 weeks later, Melody called. She'd applied for the mechanic job. She'd been hired. She was moving in 2 days. I'm scared, she admitted, but also, I don't know, excited? That's how you know it's right, Bishop told her, when fear and excitement feel like the same thing. Will you help me move? Wouldn't miss it. On moving day, Bishop showed up with the Softail and a trailer hitched to his truck. Melody's entire life fit into 12 boxes and 3 pieces of furniture. They loaded everything in silence, working with the easy rhythm of people who'd learned to communicate without words. When they pulled up to Melody's new apartment, above a garage that smelled like oil and promise, the owner was waiting. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and grease under her fingernails, who introduced herself as Rita. You must be Melody, Rita said, shaking her hand. And you're Bishop, her uncle. Rita's eyes went to the patch on his vest, then back to his face. You ride? Every day? Good. We get a lot of bike work here. You ever need anything, you let me know. Club rates for family. Melody and Rita talked while Bishop unloaded boxes, and by the time the truck was empty, Melody had already been offered overtime on Saturdays and an invitation to Rita's Sunday barbecues. Bishop stayed long enough to help set up the furniture, then stepped back as Melody moved through the space, making it hers. You gonna be okay? He asked. Yeah. Melody smiled, and it reached her eyes. I really think I am. Bishop hugged her, felt her squeeze back hard enough to hurt, then let her go. Call if you need anything, he said. I will.
He walked down to the Softail, fired the engine, and rode away from Melody's new life toward his own. The road stretched before him, familiar and endless, and Bishop felt Colt riding beside him, felt the weight of 23 years lift just enough to let the light in. At a stoplight, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to the club group chat. Ride this Sunday. Dawn. Everyone who can make it. The responses came fast. I'm in. Hell yeah. Where we going? Does it matter? Bishop smiled and put the phone away. The light changed. He rolled the throttle and disappeared into traffic. Just another rider on just another day, carrying stories and promises and the understanding that the road never really ended. It just waited for you to choose the next turn, the next sunrise, the next mile. The Softail would ride for years after that. Bishop would put another 100,000 miles on her, would cross the country 3 more times, would stop at Melody's garage every few months to check in and hear about the bikes she was fixing and the life she was building. And every time he visited, they'd have coffee and pie and talk about Colt, about the ride they'd taken, about the way the past and present could exist in the same moment when you were brave enough to keep moving forward. On Bishop's 55th birthday, Melody showed up at his apartment with a gift, a photograph in a custom frame. It showed Bishop and Melody on the Softail, stopped at the Pacific Overlook, both of them smiling into the wind with the ocean stretching behind them like infinity. Thought you might want this, Melody said, to remember. Bishop hung it above his bed, and every morning when he woke, the first thing he saw was proof that promises could be kept, that roads could be ridden, and that love didn't end when the engine stopped. It just changed form, became miles and memory, and the stories we tell to keep the dead alive in the hearts of the living.
Years later, when Bishop was too old to ride anymore, when his hands shook too much to trust the throttle and his eyes couldn't track the road like they used to, he sold the Softail to Melody. Keep her running, he told her. Keep her on the road. And when you ride, remember that you're carrying more than just yourself. You're carrying every story we told, every mile we shared, every promise your father never got to keep. Melody promised, and she rode. And somewhere, in the space between thunder and silence, in the rumble of chrome and the whisper of wind, Colt and Bishop rode with her. Ghosts made real by motion, brothers bound by roads that never ended, and love that couldn't be measured in miles or years or anything except the simple truth that some promises outlasted death. Some roads led home, and some stories were worth telling until the very last engine fell silent and the final sunrise broke over the edge of the world. I think he's proud of you too, for keeping the promise, for being the kind of man who doesn't forget. Bishop's throat tightened. He managed to nod. Melody went inside, and Bishop sat on the bike for a long moment, feeling the weight of completion, the strange emptiness that came after a promise kept. Then he fired the engine and rode through town, through familiar streets that felt different somehow, until he reached the cemetery. It was almost dark. The oak tree was a silhouette against the deepening sky, and Colt's grave was just a shadow among shadows. Bishop parked the bike, walked to the headstone, and stood there in the fading light. We did it, brother, Bishop said to the stone, to the ground, to the memory that lived in the space between heartbeats. 2,000 miles, every sunrise you missed, every story I could remember. She knows you now, really knows you, not just the legend, but the man. He paused, let the wind carry his words away. She's going to be okay. Better than okay.
She's gonna find her own road, same way you taught me to find mine. The oak leaves rustled. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, long and lonely and heading somewhere else. Bishop crouched down, touched the headstone one last time. I'll keep riding, Colt. Keep watching the sunrises. Keep carrying the stories. Because that's what brothers do. That's what family means. He stood, walked back to the bike, and rode home through the darkness. The engine's rumble, the only sound in a world gone quiet and holy, with the weight of promises kept,
and roads that stretched forever into whatever came next. 3 weeks later, Melody called. She'd applied for the mechanic job. She'd been hired. She was moving in 2 days. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but also, I don't know. Excited?" "That's how you know it's right," Bishop told her. "When fear and excitement feel like the same thing." "Will you help me move?" "Wouldn't miss it." On moving day, Bishop showed up with the Softail and a trailer hitched to his truck. Melody's entire life fit into 12 boxes and 3 pieces of furniture. They loaded everything in silence, working with the easy rhythm of people who'd learned to communicate without words. When they pulled up to Melody's new apartment, above a garage that smelled like oil and promise, the owner was waiting. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and grease under her fingernails, who introduced herself as Rita. "You must be Melody," Rita said, shaking her hand. "And you're Bishop, her uncle." Rita's eyes went to the patch on his vest, then back to his face. "You ride?" "Every day." "Good. We get a lot of bike work here. You ever need anything, you let me know. Club rates for family." Melody and Rita talked while Bishop unloaded boxes, and by the time the truck was empty, Melody had already been offered overtime on Saturdays and an invitation to Rita's Sunday barbecues.
Bishop stayed long enough to help set up the furniture, then stepped back as Melody moved through the space, making it hers. "You gonna be okay?" he asked. "Yeah." Melody smiled, and it reached her eyes. "I really think I am." Bishop hugged her, felt her squeeze back hard enough to hurt, then let her go. "Call if you need anything," he said. "I will." He walked down to the Softail, fired the engine, and rode away from Melody's new life toward his own. The road stretched before him, familiar and endless, and Bishop felt Colt riding beside him, felt the weight of 23 years lift just enough to let the light in. At a stoplight, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to the club group chat. "Ride this Sunday, dawn, everyone who can make it." The responses came fast. "I'm in. Hell yeah. Where are we going? Does it matter?" Bishop smiled and put the phone away. The light changed. He rolled the throttle and disappeared into traffic. Just another rider on just another day, carrying stories and promises and the understanding that the road never really ended. It just waited for you to choose the next turn, the next sunrise, the next mile. The Softail would ride for years after that. Bishop would put another 100,000 miles on her, would cross the country 3 more times, would stop in Melody's garage every few months to check in and hear about the bikes she was fixing and the life she was building. And every time he visited, they'd have coffee and pie and talk about Colt, about the ride they'd taken, about the way the past and present could exist in the same moment when you were brave enough to keep moving forward. On Bishop's 55th birthday, Melody showed up at his apartment with a gift, a photograph in a custom frame. It showed Bishop and Melody on the Softail, stopped at the Pacific Overlook, both of them smiling into the wind with the ocean stretching behind them like infinity. "Thought you might want this," Melody said, "to remember." Bishop hung it above his bed, and every morning when he woke, the first thing he saw was proof that promises could be kept, that roads could be ridden, and that love didn't end when the engine stopped. It just changed form, became miles and memory, and the stories we tell to keep the dead alive in the hearts of the living. Years later, when Bishop was too old to ride anymore, when his hands shook too much to trust the throttle, and his eyes couldn't track the road like they used to, he sold the Softail to Melody. "Keep her running," he told her. "Keep her on the road. And when you ride, remember that you're carrying more than just yourself. You're carrying every story we told, every mile we shared, every promise your father never got to keep." Melody promised, and she rode. And somewhere, in the space between thunder and silence, in the rumble of chrome and the whisper of wind, Colt and Bishop rode with her, ghosts made real by motion, brothers bound by roads that never ended, and love that couldn't be measured in miles or years or anything except the simple truth
that some promises outlasted death, some roads led home, and some stories were worth telling until the very last engine fell silent and the final sunrise broke over the edge of the world.